Welcome back, everyone. We've officially made it to week 2 of our show. This is our week 2 news episode. It's actually technically week 9 of the college football season, but with our late start, this is our second week of production for you guys. We have a pretty big docket for our news episode this week. A lot of things took place over the weekend, and mainly the Big Ten started playing football again, so you bring in the best, probably second best conference in football. You're going to see some changes to the rankings, which we have a pretty big segment on that coming up near the end of our show. But we're going to start this episode with probably an injury that you've heard throughout the spectrum of college football this weekend, and that is Alabama star wide receiver Jalen Waddle fractured his ankle on the opening kickoff of last week's game versus Tennessee. It's just a really, really tragic loss for both Alabama and for football in general. He was probably one of the more explosive players in the country, and so just not having him on the field is a loss for everyone involved. So what do you make of what took place there in Tennessee this weekend?
I mean, it's sad. You see one of the best playmakers in all of college football go down, not only for a game, but to be out of the season. And, odds are Alabama right now, they've gotten through some tough games already. They beat Georgia, and you could see them likely in the college football playoff, and they're only getting better. So it sucks to see a guy as explosive as Jalen Waddle out. I hope the best for him. And it was interesting because Nick Saban said that based on how deep it was in the end zone, he shouldn't have come out. And it kind of seemed to dampen obviously it was sad already, but it was like putting blame on the injured. And I didn't exactly like that, but Alabama's got plenty of playmakers, and they probably will be back to the playoffs again.
Very interesting comment there from head coach Nick Saban. It's a topic that needs to be discussed, though. Not only was it a fairly deep kick, but he is, like we touched on, the most explosive player on the field. What is kind of the drawback there, of, if there is any, in your opinion, of having a player of that caliber who's that important to your offense back there kind of returning kicks and making sure that he isn't necessarily undergoing an injury of this severity on a play that necessarily doesn't even set your team up in great field position or give you such a leg up in that regard?
Well, I think there's two trains of thoughts on this, and one is you want the best playmaker, most explosive player with the ball, and it gives you the best chance to have great field position and/or a score that you don't have to earn, like by a long drive. So for that said, Jalen Waddle's a pretty good person to have back there. And then the opposite is like we're seeing now, which is rare that someone's going to have a fractured ankle on a return, but it leads to excess exposure, and there were considerable risks. Christian McCaffrey led the college football in entirety at 2015 for all-purpose yards, and people were saying he shouldn't be returning kicks, he shouldn't be returning punts, and he made it through healthy with all those extra dings on his body. But it can happen both ways. And there's valid arguments for both sides of that.
Yeah, I agree. I just think there's also an argument to be had there of the amount of times you bust a kickoff back for a touchdown is pretty rare as well. You know what I mean? So I think there's a conversation to be had about kind of making sure that your most explosive players are able to play with your offense to set up those drives. But he is such a talent that it's a shame to see anything like this happen to him. But it's also another one of those fun topics to kind of go back and forth on and see. And obviously now you can draw all the parallels of he shouldn't have been back there. He got hurt doing this. He wasn't even on offense. But if that play didn't happen and he were to have returned the kick for a touchdown, it would have been a completely different story of, oh my gosh, you have to have him back there. He needs to touch the ball whenever he can. So it's a pretty interesting parallel there. So like we said, it is a fractured ankle. Head coach Nick Saban said that he underwent surgery on that ankle Saturday night there in Birmingham. He said that surgery went very, very well. He's expected to make a full recovery. The latest timetable that we've seen is Nick Saban did say it's still a little unclear, but he mentioned that most people need 6 to 8 weeks at least to begin heavy rehab on an injury of this severity. So pretty much don't expect to see Waddle back for the rest of the season. What do we make of all that?
I think the honest thing is that Waddle shouldn't come back. He's going to be a first-round draft pick if he's able to run at the combine. He might even set the fastest at this year's combine, and maybe ever. He's extremely fast. He's a freak athlete among freak athletes at skill positions. So if he's able to come back running at the similar speed and train, he should just go straight to the combine and not worry about the college football season, because that's really a risky proposition for someone who should be a first-round pick.
Yeah, and this is one of those injuries too that really hurts us to see, because he was so explosive last season as well. And you saw Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy from Alabama both go to the league, and he was kind of viewed as that third receiver to that combo with Devontae Smith as like a fourth receiver. They had so much talent last season, but anyway, so he comes back to make sure that he has as high draft status as he can, and then something like this happens. So it's really quite tragic to see. So yeah, I agree that it would be very, very rash to come back this season and try and play. I'm not sure if you'll see him come back for another season, see if he can redshirt, because he hasn't played that many games. But we'll have to hear about that in the weeks coming up. But we have another. The Big Ten just started playing last week, and already we have a positive test out of Wisconsin. What are we learning from there?
It's another real shame. Graham Mertz just had a career game, 20 of 21 and 5 touchdowns in his first career start, and he was the most touted Wisconsin quarterback recruit in who knows how long. So he tested positive. He had an antigen test come back positive, and he will take a polymerase chain reaction test to confirm the result. So if confirmed, he'd have to miss 21 days, and that's 3 weeks. So that's really big news, especially because they're one of the best teams in college football.
For sure. We've seen a couple false positives around college football this season, but we haven't really heard any more updates out of the Wisconsin camp there, and if there's other people having these positive tests. So it seems to me like this is at least sort of an isolated positive at this point in time. So there is a chance that could be what it is, as a false positive test. But in those 21 days, if he's out 3 weeks, they play Nebraska, who hung with Ohio State for a half. They host Purdue, who's known to spring an upset here or there in the Big Ten in the course of the Big Ten season. And they travel to number 13 Michigan, which is one of their bigger crossover games to play in the Big Ten East on the season. So it's a really big talking point, because we just talked in our last recap episode that Wisconsin's supposed to be that next best team in the Big Ten other than Ohio State, and pretty much the only one that can challenge them for that right to go to either the Rose Bowl or the college football playoff. So some pretty big news here.
Yeah, for sure. And then on a football standpoint, if he's to miss those games, by no means are those easy games, as you said. But then you'd have sophomore Chase Wolf step in, and he's never played a snap of college football. So that's huge. And Mertz was new as well, but he was a really touted recruit, and he was playing under Jack Cowan, who missed this season with an injury. So if they go to effectively what was supposed to be their third string starting quarterback, that's really going to put a damper on a team that's got a ton of promise in Wisconsin, who's number 9 in the country right now.
Keeping things in the Big Ten here for a second, we have another injury update to provide you guys with this episode. Penn State running back Noah Cain. We touched on him when we talked about Journey Brown going down with an injury, that he was one of those sophomores that would have to step up and replace him. He's now out for the rest of the season with a leg injury. It was injured on the opening drive of the game against Indiana. So this is really one of those points that's really interesting to see. Maybe it's one of those reasons why Sean Clifford carried the ball 17 times last weekend. And so now that they have Journey Brown go out for the entirety of the season, they now lose Noah Cain. They're down to Devin Ford, who is the only one in really that backfield that has any experience anymore. He was a 5-star recruit, though, so he's expected to be that guy. And they are now having to have 2 freshmen step up, Kayvone Lee and Keziah Holmes. So what are we going to make of this Penn State backfield with the matchup with Ohio State looming this weekend?
Well, obviously it's a hit. Noah Cain's a really talented back, and as was Journey Brown, as we saw him explode on Memphis and at the end of the season in general last year. So that one really hurt. And then we were like, oh, they've still got good depth. And I would still say they if you're any running back room in the country, this was a good one to lose 2 backs in. Yeah, you have still available a couple 4-stars and a 1 5-star. But they're lacking experience, and you don't want to play Ohio State without experienced backs. So yeah, I expect Clifford to run the ball a lot like he did against Indiana, but I don't think that'll work as effectively against a sharpened and NFL ready. Most of the players on Ohio State are NFL bound, so that'll be a really tough game for Clifford and Penn State, in my opinion, just due to players having to step up that are unaccustomed to the situation, much less playing Ohio State.
For sure. When you look at the caliber of where this running back room has sat in the last few years, you look at, led by Saquon Barkley, he was probably one of the more electric players in college football history. Miles Sanders came in after him and was truly phenomenal. He got drafted by the Eagles and is now a starting running back in his second season. And then you had 4 5-star recruits. We touched on Journey Brown. We touched on Noah Cain. We've talked about Devin Ford, but there was a guy named Ricky Slade in that room as well, and he transferred. I forget exactly to which school. I think it was
Old Dominion.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Old Dominion. And it's just one of those things where, like, if you're looking back at Ricky Slade, he's now sitting in Old Dominion, and Penn State's sitting there like, we miss you. Come on back. Like we could really use you at this given point, but you look at this running back room and what it was to move into this year with the departure of Miles Sanders and all of that stuff. And last year having Journey Brown as a real stud, and you still had these 3 guys behind him. And so now it's just completely depleted. We touched on we don't want to say it's a good team to have it happen to because they had so much depth, but in a year that's kind of been ever changing and ever fluctuating in what's happening. It's just one of those things for Penn State fans that you have to look back on and be like, man, what could have been? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And we said this in the very first episode is the best ability is availability. And some of these injuries are really unfortunate and probably due to lack of not necessarily they're out of condition, but it's just football is such a physical game that, you know, any tweak on the body when you're not as accustomed to it with less practice, I expected more injuries this season, and we saw that in the NFL. We're seeing that at the beginning of the college football season for both the Big Ten and even when the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 started playing. So it's a dangerous game right now, one with coronavirus and all the stuff that's happening there and impacting all these teams, but also the bodies are just acclimated to what it is. And so, like you said, Penn State had such a good room, but it's still what could have been because they had so much talent.
100%. I agree with you there. So 2 freshmen are going to really have to step up and spell. Devin Ford is going to have to handle pretty much the majority of the load moving forward here for a Penn State team kind of desperate to find their identity on the offensive side of the ball. It's an interesting storyline moving forward for this game in particular against Ohio State because Sean Clifford didn't have a great game last year in Columbus, and Will Levis, the backup QB, actually came in and spelled him. He's kind of very similar to Taysom Hill for the Saints in the NFL, who you see get those goal line snaps at quarterback and just expect to barrel over people because he's a big, strong, powerful running quarterback. Not the best, most polished passer, but I think you can really you might honestly have to expect him to carry the ball a little bit in this game because they did that with such success last season and honestly started to come back in that game. They just ran out of time against Ohio State last season. So what do we make about that?
I think Clifford had such a good running game with 117 yards against Indiana. It'll be interesting to see how much Levis plays because that was his main strength. He's a bigger guy, and Ohio State they lost some great pass rushers and pass defenders such as Damon Arnett and Okuda in the back, and then of course Chase Young. So they had to have someone run rather than drop backs. And I wonder if this year they'll be more throwing inclined, especially with the injuries. But that'll be interesting to monitor because Levis could be an X factor in that game.
For sure. Well, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. This is definitely a game that we're going to preview this week for you guys upcoming in this weekend. I know a lot of people, just selfishly, a lot of people have reached out to me back home because I'm from Pennsylvania that are like, touch on Penn State. We'll get there for sure, but it's going to be all hands on deck for the Nittany Lions this weekend to provide some offense against that Ohio State defense. So moving forward in our episode here tonight, we've gotten to, once again, the University of Florida. They, as we touched on in our first news episode, they had a COVID outbreak in their football program. Right now they sit at 32 positive tests this month. They've had 2 games postponed. One was a highlighted game against LSU, which we touched on, that was supposed to take place October 17th. It's been rescheduled back to December 12th. And then one game was postponed last weekend against Missouri. And that is now being made up this weekend, October 31st, 7 p.m. Eastern time, at home for Florida in the Swamp. So we don't have any word yet if there's going to be fans in attendance. I would assume none of the mandates in the state of Florida have changed. So I don't know if it's going to be something that the university administration has to lay down. But what are we thinking about here in Florida, coming off of now a 3-week layoff? And yeah, what are we thinking there?
Well, it's so interesting because 3 weeks ago we were talking about they lost to Texas A&M at College Station, and Dan Mullen, as we said he wanted 60 to 90,000 fans in the Swamp. And now they're worried about even having any fans because his team is positive test riddled. They have 32 positive tests in a month, much less like how many they had in preseason and all that stuff. So I doubt there's going to be fans. I think that's just an unnecessary risk, and I wonder how that'll impact the game. And I wonder who can even play. I mean, we don't know who's tested positive on that team. It's a super talented team, but if they're missing some key players, it definitely impacts the team.
100%. We have no names at this point. They haven't come out and said who has tested positive, who's going to be playing on Saturday. We don't even know if head coach Dan Mullen's going to be on the sideline because he had tested positive. So there's just so many unknowns about this situation moving forward. And honestly, I was kind of shocked that they even have a game scheduled this weekend. So especially having it taking place in Florida in the Swamp. So like you said, kind of a ridiculous looking quote now from head coach Dan Mullen that he wanted 90,000 fans in the Swamp. It's a storyline that we'll have to look for moving forward, but it's just one of those things that it did not age well, as a lot of people now like to say. So they practiced for the first time in 2 weeks on Monday. So as of right now, it looks like it's all guns a-blazing to play on Saturday, but it's one of those.
How many scholarship players do you think they have?
I would say they're at least down 25 scholarship players at this point.
Yeah, that's a safe assumption.
I would say that's a pretty solid number to say at least 25 of those 32 positive cases are scholarship players. So I saw a stat when this first came out that 21 of them were positive, were scholarship players.
Yeah, 21 to 25.
I would say that has gone up a little bit, but also it's going to be one of those things that we just have no idea what Florida team is going to take the field on Saturday.
For sure. So,
all right, enough harping about some of the bad stuff that's happening in the grand scheme of college football this week. We're gonna talk now about the rankings. They were pretty fluctuating this week. Ohio State, we're gonna start there. We touched on the matchup they have upcoming against Penn State. They moved up 2 spots already after their win against Nebraska to nestle in at the number 3 spot. This dropped Notre Dame to number 4 and Georgia to number 5. What do we think about these moves?
I think that they deserve it. I mean, it wasn't even that pretty of a game, but they're a really, really good team, and it's not necessarily their fault that they couldn't play the games prior. I think they're a better team than Notre Dame and, to this point, Georgia. So I think it's fair.
I would agree. I think Notre Dame's probably the only team that has sort of any sort of gripe about the move. You know what I mean? So, yeah. But you have to look back at what they've done this year. They beat Louisville 12-7. and they've had some games where they have not looked that dominant.
Yeah.
And then Georgia's already lost their biggest game of the season to Alabama. So you kind of, if you're a Georgia fan, you had to kind of assume that that was coming once Ohio State started playing again and winning. So I don't think I think it'll still be a little bit before they've proved enough to the AP poll and the college football playoff poll that they're better than Alabama or Clemson to take either the 1 or 2 slot. But I think for now, the move up to 3 is pretty justified. But I think Notre Dame has sort of a reason to be like, what happened there? But I think, again, like you touched on, I think they are a better team than Notre Dame, especially even only playing 1 week of the season. Oklahoma State rounds out the top 6. They nestle there in there again at number 6. They didn't move. We like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think they beat a pretty good Iowa State team that was ranked 17th entering that week, and it was a tough game, but their defense came to play, and their offense got enough done. I think they're deserving of that spot, and I think they're the last chance the Big 12 has of a playoff team this year.
What do we think that they need to do to overtake Georgia in the number 5 slot? Because
Georgia's going to be tough to overtake. I think you just need an upset at that point. I think Notre Dame you could fall out because they Carolina and Clemson in the ACC because they're playing an ACC schedule even though they're an independent. So I think they can get up to 5, but they're going to need some luck to get into the top 4, in my opinion.
Okay. I would say it's a little bit touchy. I think I think it's pretty telling that they just won a top 25 ranked matchup and didn't move up ahead of them with no losses at this point. I think if they knock off some of those perennial powers in the Big 12 and look dominant doing so, then I think they have a case over a 1-loss Georgia, at least at this point. But also you have to think that Georgia and Alabama are going to see each other again. So if that happens and Alabama beats them again, and that's a 2-loss Georgia, then I think there's a lot of ground that you can stand on at that point. If Oklahoma State would go undefeated, that you can say that's a better team.
Yeah, I think they'd pass them if they were to have a second loss, whether it be to Alabama or anyone in the SEC East. Yeah. I think as soon as the second loss happens to Georgia, they're out of the equation entirely.
Yeah, I think Georgia, like you just touched on, has to win out. Cincinnati, we talked about them heavily this past week. They move up 2 spots to number 7 after their dominating performance over SMU. What do we think about that move? You kind of called it on that one.
I was pretty happy to see the poll and have them be at number 7 because we actually talked about this in our recap episode that I thought they were the 7th best team in the country. So to see them at 7 made me happy, made me feel good about myself. And I think it's fully deserving. They held a really good SMU team to 13 points and dominated that game. So I don't know how they're like Oklahoma State. They're going to need some luck to move up, but they're definitely one of the elite teams in the country.
I think them sitting at number 7 is absolutely the right call. I think they've proved enough that they have enough firepower on offense and enough strength and legitimacy on defense to really say that they are the best option in the group of 5 at this point. We touched on Wisconsin's COVID issues. They moved up 5 spots. They were one of the biggest movers of the week this week. They moved 5 spots up to number 9 from number 14. So we've harped on that. It's Wisconsin and Ohio State at this point with the best 2 teams in the East and the West of the Big Ten. What do we think about them moving up to number 9 already?
They had a dominating performance. Not that Illinois is a fabulous team in general, but they came out to play. And to get the production they got out of Mertz, 20 of 21, 5 touchdowns, was unexpected because Wisconsin typically grounds and pounds, and they get in tight games, and they need big plays from what used to be Jonathan Taylor, Monte Ball, Melvin Gordon. And so to have a throwing game complement their always stout running game and good defense, I think they're a legitimate team, and I hope that Mertz is able to go. But obviously he's got to pass some tests first.
Yeah, it would be very tragic if we were to see that kind of spoil their success this season moving forward. Michigan moved up 5 spots as well after their dominating win over Minnesota. They're up to number 13. So we touched on again this ever fluctuating scenario in the Big Ten of it was Penn State, Ohio State that were going to fight for that East ranking, but here comes Michigan, man. They're up to number 3 ahead of Penn State already. So what do we think about that?
They played phenomenally. They dominated the Gophers in the run game. Their defense was good. They were able to stop the run after early in the game, and I thought this is also a justified ranking. They played really really well in all facets of the game, and Milton, which was our main concern entering that game, was efficient. He was 15 to 22, and he controlled the game both through the air and on the ground. So I'm impressed with Harbaugh in Michigan, and I really hope we get to see the Michigan-Wisconsin matchup from 3 weeks from now, with a healthy teams on both sides, whether injuries or COVID.
For sure. We're going to do a little twofer here. Penn State lost this weekend to Indiana. Indiana jumped up into the rankings to number 17 for 18 from number 10. So yeah, I think that's pretty justified to have the team that just knocked off the number 8 team in the land sit one spot ahead of them.
I think it's fair. I think they one game each, and one team won, one team didn't, but it was obviously excruciatingly close. So I'm fine with the rankings. I think even with Penn State having to play Ohio State, as we've already mentioned and will cover again, I think they're one of the best 20 teams, if not 15 teams in the land, and they'll move up as the season goes. I'm curious to see how Indiana goes, or if this was just a big opening week in Bloomington. They wanted to prove they could beat Penn State after 33 years type of thing. So that'll be interesting to monitor.
Yeah, moving forward, that's going to be a big storyline, especially for Penn State, of being like, oh, is this actually a quality loss to an overtime team at home, or is that just a fluke where Indiana really isn't that good? So Iowa State lost again this weekend. It's their second loss of the season now. But they've stayed in the rankings. So they fell to number 23, and they were previously at 17. Do we think they deserve a spot in the top 25 still?
Yeah, I for sure. I thought that Oklahoma State is, if we agree to their top 6 team, and to play them to a 3-point loss is something that shouldn't hurt your, especially on the road in Stillwater, that shouldn't hurt your resume at all. And I understand that it has to when you have 2 losses, but I don't think that's really a negative in the eyes, should be a negative in the eyes of a poll.
I agree. I think they're still the top 25 team. Oklahoma, though, on the other hand, beat a 1-1 TCU team, and they instantaneously moved back into the polls to number 24, and they sit at 3-2 on the season. What do you make of that move?
I mean, I think that's a brand name getting themselves advertised. That they're not very good this year. They're supremely talented, and they could beat anyone. I think they're the stiffest test for Oklahoma State to go. It's just, they've got a marquee name, and so they're back in it. I don't know if they're a top 25 team though.
I agree. I think it's one of those things that's still a little too early to tell. Spencer Rattler's looked better, but I still don't think that they're one of the best 25 teams in the country. And I think once the Pac-12 resumes play, I think you might see some fluctuation even more so there. Boise State, we said, looked dominant in their win over Utah State. They got rewarded with that as they climbed into the 25th spot. So do we think that's justified? Do we think they're enough of a legitimate group of 5 contender to say we deserve a ranking?
Yeah, no, I thought they played a dominant game against a fairly good Utah State team. And they're more deserving in my eyes after one game than Oklahoma is to be in the top 25. So if it were down to one of those being in, even though they both are in at 24 and 25, I'd for sure take Boise State, because all they've been able to do, you can't blame them for not having a season, is they came out and took care of their business. So I was really impressed by Boise State, and it'll be very, very interesting to see how they play some of their other big games coming up.
I agree. Man, I swear, we keep getting drawn back to this team, but you can't talk about Coastal Carolina not moving up 5 spots from their already previous school record high of 25th. They're now at number 20 at 5-0.
I'm pleased. I don't know if they're the 20th best team in the land, but as long as they're winning, I'm happy they're in the polls.
I agree. I just think it's one of those things that you can't keep. We made it such a big deal in our last couple episodes, and it's just one of those fun storylines to talk about moving forward. I fully expect them to be unranked by the end of the season, but man, right now they're sitting at 20 and they're saying we deserve a shot at the playoff.
If they run the gauntlet in the Sun Belt and go undefeated, do you think they get up to the top 15?
I don't think top 15. I think things will solidify a little bit. I think they'll have some grounds to stand on to say give us a ranking between 25 and 15, but I don't think they'll get all the way up to 15. But hey, if they keep winning and you never know what you're going to see with teams having to shut down or God forbid or anything like that happening. So you never know in this year.
I'm rooting for it, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think so. So we are students at the University of Utah, but we made a pledge that things will remain completely unbiased on our show. BYU currently sits at number 11. This is a storyline we have yet to talk about on this show. There's clearly a lack of that big name in their schedule at this point, but they are they 6-0?
Yeah, I think they're 6-0.
I think they're 6-0. So anyway, they're either 5-0 or 6-0, undefeated, and they are currently sitting on the fringe of the top 10. What do we make of BYU this season?
I think they're pretty good, actually. I've never actually despised BYU at all. I have no animosity towards them, even as a University of Utah student. I've played basketball against their quarterback, Zach Wilson, so it's kind of cool to see him balling out and getting all this love. I don't know if they're the 11th best team in the country, especially with the Pac-12 not playing yet. I tend to favor Oregon. But I think a big measuring stick moment for what BYU is when they play a team like Boise State, a team that's got pedigree, even though they're not like in a big conference. And so we'll see. They're doing the best they can do with their schedule. As an independent, it was hard to find a schedule this season. And so credit to their staff, and Kalani Sitake, their head coach, has got them ready to play. They came out with a drubbing of Navy, and they came out to play. And so I'm happy that they're getting recognition for playing well and doing what they can.
I agree. I think they are a very good team. I think they have a lot of upside on both sides of the ball. I think Zach Wilson has made tremendous strides at quarterback. I don't hold animosity towards BYU from being a Utah fan. I think you're looking at another similar situation here to a group of 5 team that plays a softer schedule than people in the Power 5. They don't have a conference that they can win, which is a big ticket that doesn't get checked off there with the College Football Playoff Committee. And yeah, it's a much less daunting schedule than they usually play. And I think that's an interesting point to touch on, though, is that they're 5 or 6-0, or we don't have the stat on hand, I'm sorry, but they're at this point and they're getting all this national recognition. But usually if they play one of their quote unquote normal schedules where they play a couple really tough games and teams from the Pac-12 and Power 5 conferences, and they sit there at 3-2 and they're not getting any notoriety at all. So I think it's a really interesting point to talk about if it's worth scheduling the quote unquote weaker schedule or not.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because I remember before coronavirus hit that BYU was very proud of their schedule that Tom Holmoe, their athletic director, came up with. They had Stanford and Notre Dame. And I know Stanford had a down season last season, but they traditionally the last 10 years have been one of the best teams in the West. And Notre Dame's obviously a very good team. So they had 2 really difficult teams to open up the season, and they played a difficult schedule throughout. So if you take this team's current pace and you play those games, how would they be? And that would be a really good indicator of how good the team is. But sadly, we don't get to see it because everything got scrambled. So I think taking care of their business deserves them a top 15 spot right now. I think as soon as the Pac-12 plays and some more of the Big Ten gets underway, I think they might slide a little bit. But I think they're going to keep taking care of their business, and I really am looking forward to that BYU and Boise State matchup that is awaiting.
I agree. I think there's still a lot. The jury's still out on what's going to happen with BYU this year, but it's a point that needed to be brought up and discussed. With that, the Pac-12 play is not this week, but next week they'll start play there. So we're gonna hold serve on that for at least this week's news episode, as we're running a little short on time here. So I just want to say once again, Leif, thanks so much for doing this with me. We're having a blast doing it. Make sure everyone to like, share, subscribe, retweet, post on your story, whatever you want to do. Helps us out significantly. So thanks so much for everyone's support out there. we'll keep making sure we're getting all the best information and all the best games and all that stuff for everyone out there who wants to hear it.
Yeah, and let us know if you guys have any games you guys want to hear specifically about, or even just random questions that you come into your mind. If you don't understand something we're talking about, we're happy to analyze it, and we're having a great time bringing it out to you, and hope you guys enjoy it.
Yep, anything, anytime. Make sure to reach out to us. We're both very approachable. So, all right, everyone, take care, and we will see you on Thursday for our preview episode for this weekend.
Thank you.